Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Simon. My name is Cara Gillis. I am a forester with the Department of Natural Resources. I'm also a woodlot owner and born and raised here in Cape Breton. Actually, the last time I was at this specific conference was probably about 15 years ago. I came here with my dad when I was still in high school, I think. So this is kind of a nice full circle moment now working in the industry. Yeah. Okay. How's now? Is that better? Okay. Sorry about that. So I'm going to give an overview today on the 2 billion tree program. And just a point of clarification before I get started, I know some of you may have heard that the 2 billion tree program was scrapped in the federal budget back in November. So we are lucky to still have funding with this program. So we signed a long-term agreement with the federal government back in 2024. So we have funding until the end of the program in 2031. So maybe planting a few less trees, but just letting everyone know we're still here. So just to go over the program a little bit, as I said, it's a federally funded program through Natural Resources Canada. So the province of Nova Scotia has funding from the feds that we delivered through a partnership with the Clean Foundation. So the Clean Foundation is our program delivery agent, and they handle program outreach, expressions of interest from landowners and different proponents that might want to plant some trees. And they also coordinate the site visits and the project planning. So DNR, we will approve projects and help with some of the coordination of the program. And just another plug, there's an ongoing call for proposals. So if you're interested in planting trees, please talk to myself or Maddie, who has a booth out there. So originally, the 2 Billion Trees program was launched as an initiative primarily to sequester carbon. We have found, though, throughout the program that beyond carbon, there are numerous benefits that are equally, if not more important. So really, our goal of our program is to increase forest cover in Nova Scotia, to improve forest resiliency and adaptation to climate change, increase biodiversity, and to create economic growth and opportunities in the forest economy in Nova Scotia. Sorry. So, I don't know if I went ahead too far. Okay. Just to go over a few of our milestones. So the program, we started in Nova Scotia in 2023 when the federal funding was granted to the province. At that time, the Clean Foundation became the program delivery agent, and a lot of planning started to happen in terms of how the program would be delivered, and a lot of outreach was happening at this time. 2024, tree planting began. So obviously we know in 2023 we had kind of a historical wildfire season. So there was really significant wildfires in Barrington Lake and also in the HRM, Upper Tantallon Hammonds Plain wildfire. So this was kind of the focus of planting efforts in 2024, is to try to restore some of these areas that were impacted. Importantly, in 2024, we also signed our long-term agreement with the federal government. This was something that initially wasn't going to happen. We were going to kind of be on a couple years at a time agreement. And looking back now, we are so grateful that we made the decision to sign that long-term agreement. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be continuing here today. And then in that first season, or that first year, we planted 500,000 trees. 2025 was a bit of a difficult year, as many of you probably know. So we had planned to plant about 1.3 million trees, but a large portion of those were set for the fall planting season. Obviously, with the drought, we were not able to plant. So we had a much reduced number, but we still planted over 600,000 trees and really started to focus in on our monitoring of survival of our first batch of trees that were planted in 2024. So I guess 2026, this is going to be our largest season, or our largest year to date. So we've got over, I think, close to now 3.5 million trees planned for 2026. A lot of that is making up for what we couldn't plant in 2025, but there's also a lot of new projects that are coming online. We're also going to increase our monitoring efforts. So I'll get a little bit more into monitoring and how we do that as I go on in the presentation. But really, these kind of early years of planting are really important for us to try to hone in on what works and what doesn't. Obviously, the goal for Nova Scotia anyways is to plant up to 21 million trees by 2031. So yes, we want to plant a lot of trees, but the most important thing is that we plant trees that survive and that contribute to the future forests of the province. So this is something I put up here. There's a QR code if you want to access it yourselves, but the Clean Foundation put together this project map that really just shows where we've been working and what trees we've been planting and how many. You probably can't see the chart there that breaks down the tree species we plant, but you can probably tell that we plant a wide variety of species. Right now, the largest piece of the pie there is Highland white spruce, and that is primarily because our largest project to date has been in the Cape Breton Highlands, so that's the most appropriate tree species in that area. But we plant a whole range of native hardwoods and softwoods. So it's a little bit more than kind of the typical reforestation planting stock. As far as tree size goes, they are traditional reforestation stocks, so we don't plant larger stock trees. As far as the planning process goes, if anyone's interested, so initially we go through an expression of interest process. So Clean receives an expression of interest from a landowner or a company or anyone that is looking to plant trees. And then Clean will organize an initial meeting to kind of gauge what the proponent is looking for, what kinds of species they're looking to get planted, where the site is, and kind of just talk through any of those details. From the initial meeting, a site visit is planned. So Clean staff will go out to the property and really just try to assess the site, the soil, and determine what tree species are most ecologically appropriate. They'll also at the time assess if there is any site prep requirements that are needed before planting. And then from there, if a project seems like a good fit for the program, then Clean will begin to develop planting plans. From those planting plans, they'll submit that to us at DNR for approval, and then it all kind of starts rolling. So Clean Foundation will organize contractors, we'll get the trees ordered, and schedule when planting will begin. I'm going to go through a couple of project examples now, and I'll just get right into it. So I would say one of the most common examples of tree planting we've done to date is planting of abandoned agricultural fields. So as we all know, there is a lot of land that is abandoned agricultural fields in Nova Scotia. I think at one time, more than 900,000 hectares of Nova Scotia's land was farmed, and now only about a third of that exists today. So obviously there's a huge amount of abandoned fields, some that are starting to revert back to forests, but often these forests are kind of coming back as single species, maybe lacking some diversity, and are often more susceptible to future disturbances. So the goal here is to establish tree cover. So often what we do in these scenarios is we plant a higher number of species that we know do well in old fields and we know are going to grow. So something like white spruce, but also mixing in a mixture of hardwoods and pine and whatever is appropriate for the site, just to make sure that there is a future seed source, so that maybe in 100 years or so we have seed trees that are contributing to multiple generations of the forest. Another one that we are focusing on a lot, unfortunately, is forests that are disturbed from natural disturbance. So like I said, we've had a lot of wildfire instances in the past several years, and it seems like that trend is continuing, unfortunately. And we also know that wind disturbance is also a huge issue, and nobody here is a stranger to that. So, as I said, in 2024, a big focus of our projects were on wildfire sites. So these sites can be challenging just because, if anyone's familiar with wildfires, the conditions post-fire can be really challenging. Soil composition can be damaged quite a bit, so it can be difficult to get trees to regenerate again. And we also are learning that there are a lot of species that really come back fine on their own. So I know in the first year there was, for example, a huge component of red maple being planted. And then we did find that, even just not even one full season after wildfire, red maple is coming back quite fine on its own. So it's really just trying to understand what the forests in Nova Scotia look like after a fire and working with that. We're also really lucky to work with contractors that have lots of experience working in wildfires from Western Canada, so they kind of bring their expertise as well. So Hurricane Fiona obviously was a big one, and we've got a lot of project examples that where we've planted after Fiona. Obviously, planting in unsalvaged properties is really challenging. So typically the sites we planted in have already been salvaged, and we're coming in and just trying to establish tree cover after the fact. Another one, and I heard someone mention this, is that planting for climate change, planting for climate resiliency. So one thing that we're trying to get a little bit more into is underplanting and fill planting species that we know are going to do well in a changing climate, but also planting species in stands that are maybe dominated by one species, and trying to just increase species diversity, but also forest structure, so that these forests, next time there is a wind disturbance or a fire or whatever it is, the forest is a little bit more resilient and better able to handle that. So with that, we're also trying to aid in the transition to more uneven age forests in these areas that are more even aged. And here's a couple of kind of fun examples, I guess. So in addition to kind of the classic sites that we try to target, we also have a couple of, I guess we'd call special projects. The first is in partnership with the Parks Canada and the Cape Breton Highlands National Park. So we have a really large project here where we are aiming to restore the moose meadows. So the area that was impacted by spruce budworm and then subsequently moose coming in and essentially turning it into what you can see kind of looks a little bit like a grassland and no longer a forest. So this is a really logistically challenging project. However, it is one that we think is going to have a really, really big impact, and something that Parks Canada has been aiming to do through smaller funding opportunities in the past, and so we're just really hoping to expand that and cover as much ground as we can while we have funding. Another one that we're getting into now a little bit more is abandoned coal mine sites or just abandoned industrial sites in general. So this photo up here on the left is from a site in Stellarton, an old pioneer coal site. So this kind of came about just randomly, I guess. Somebody in the community in New Glasgow came forward, submitted an EOI saying that we should plant this site, and we kind of, I think, assumed that it was somebody who was involved in the industry there, but it turns out it was just a random community member who wanted to see some trees planted, which is great because it led to us developing a partnership with Pioneer Coal, and now are planting that site, but then also planting some other sites that Pioneer Coal has across the province. So yesterday I was actually out with my dad in Pointe-a-Coney collecting soil samples on a different Pioneer Coal site that we're hoping to plant next year. So I guess just a plug there for the expression of interest. You know, if you have an idea, even if it's maybe, ideally it's your land, but if it's not, maybe if you have some ideas of what we can plant, you can reach out as well. And then I'm just going to go through a few kind of specific examples of projects that we've done in the past. So this one is kind of a classic abandoned field example. So this is private land in the River John area. So this is an old agricultural field, about 5.5 hectares. And like I said, the goal was just to establish tree cover and begin the transition from a field back to a forest. So we planted a mixture of white spruce, white pine, red maple, and red oak here. And site prep involved mowing and trenching. So one of the things I found in the early survival monitoring of old field sites is really the importance of trenching, the importance of site prep. So I know a lot of landowners initially aren't necessarily comfortable with the idea of turning up the soil and maybe seeing it as damaging the soil, but we really found that trenching creates those microsites that allow the trees to better survive and really hold moisture in. So especially we saw after the drought, it was a bit of a night and day difference between old fields that were site prepped versus old fields that were not site prepped. Most fields that we plant are all mowed beforehand, but it was really the trenching that kind of made the difference of how many trees survived. So yeah, challenge in old fields certainly is drought, and it really shows to the species that can handle drought and not. So it kind of reconfirmed that planting a higher proportion of white spruce in fields is really helpful to establishing that tree cover. Also found too, and this is kind of anecdotal, but like somebody had asked before about deer and deer browse, and we found too that, you know, kind of planting spruce, but then hiding the more high value hardwoods in amongst the spruce can help. Sometimes planting a higher density overall can help, but really just kind of the aim is try to get these hardwoods that we're planting to live long enough to be seed trees for the next generation. So. Another example here, this is a partnership with the New Glasgow town. So this is municipal land in the watershed. So there's multiple properties throughout the town here that we planted. So a lot of these areas were impacted by Hurricane Fiona, and many of them were salvaged prior to planting. So the goal here was to increase species diversity and stand structure on these sites. So so this was kind of a mixture of fill planting and a little bit of underplanting as well in areas where maybe there was some already declining trees. Species mix: red spruce, white pine, tamarack, red maple, and red oak. We took into account what was already existing regeneration and planted accordingly. And I think one of the bigger drought, I think, across the board was a challenge for all sites last year, but deer browse was a huge challenge here as well, which I think is going to be a challenge in lots of places in the province. And unfortunately, to get to 21 million trees, we can't put cages around every single hardwood we plant. But we are experimenting with different techniques to try to limit deer browse, maybe next to logs or next to existing brush or existing regeneration, to kind of, I guess, camouflage or to hide these high-value hardwoods when you can. But deer is going to be an ongoing issue. So if anyone has any tips or anything that's worked for them in the past, please let us know. And a bit on monitoring, so I'll just go through this quickly. Obviously, like I said, our program is only in place until 2031, so long-term monitoring is really limited. However, we do planting quality checks while planters are on site, so we are kind of getting on top of any quality issues that could arise when they're happening, if they're happening. And we also use third-party auditing to kind of verify the results that we're seeing on the first couple days of a contract. We also do year-one survival surveys, like I said, just to, again, to try to get a sense of what does well in different areas, and just try to get a little bit more comfortable with how the different species we're planting are faring. Like I said, we're kind of planting a wider mix of species than is typical, so there's not as much, I guess, data available for some of them about how they do in certain sites. And then after that, we are aiming to do monitoring surveys, so growth surveys at year 3 to 5. Obviously, we've only got 5 years left, so that will become more and more limited as we get further into the program. But we also kind of informally have been relying on citizen monitoring. So landowners often will reach out if they have questions or concerns about tree survival, and that kind of gives us an opportunity to keep eyes on the ground through participating landowners. And long-term monitoring, like I said, is challenging, but we're already kind of trying to work with different groups and with the department as well to find solutions to monitoring these trees in the long term. All right, so I think I should have a bit of time for questions, but I'm just very quickly going to go over some frequently asked questions we get. So species composition is determined based on what is ecologically appropriate. So we use predictive ecosystem mapping. We look at soil and try to find the best mix for the site, but also do, to a certain extent, take into account landowner wishes, what they like to see on the land. So trees come from a variety of different nurseries in the province. We work with larger nurseries like Strathloran and Scott and Stewart, but we also have a network of smaller nurseries throughout the province that also provide trees. We have a network of local contractors who plant the trees and do site prep, but a lot of time for site prep, it's hard to find contractors, so we like to tap into local networks and ask landowners who they've worked with in the past as well. Restrictions that are placed on the land. So really we just have a simple waiver for landowners to sign, basically assuring that they will keep this land a forest and you're not planning on turning it into a subdivision as soon as they are planted. So yeah, it's more just like a signing it in good faith that you'll take care of the trees that are planted. We tend to look for areas that are larger than 2.5 hectares and try to plant a minimum of 5,000 trees. However, if you have areas that are smaller than that, it's still worth reaching out because we like to group properties that are close together. So maybe you have a landowner next to you who has some land that wants to get planted as well. And what is required of the landowner? Honestly, just access to the land and permission to plant. So there's no cost to the landowner. We handle getting the trees, we handle site prep, we handle hiring the planters, and we kind of take care of it all. So with that, thank you so much. If you would like to submit an expression of interest, there's a QR code there, or you can see Maddie at the booth during the breaks. And yeah, there's Maddie. And yeah, thank you so much. Bye.